G'day everyone, I'm Ross from the Composites shop. Welcome to this episode 4 of our surf kayak build. As you can see here, I'm sort of busy doing other projects at the moment, but I'm going to step back to our surf kayak build, and in fact it's going to be appropriate to pretty much any hand lamination that you might want to attempt. Basically last week we put a pretty fancy gel coat pattern on our surf kayak mould, on the deck of our mould, and this week I'm going to go through the process of laminating it and then demolding it. So I hope you enjoy it. Don't forget to click like and subscribe and click that notification bell, because if you don't, you're going to miss out on all the feeds and the important steps along the way to firstly building this kayak, and secondly all the other stuff we're going to have coming to you in the future in the Composites shop. So thanks for joining me, and I'll catch you soon. Let's get into it. Hey, it's sort of mid-afternoon and I did this at around about 10 o'clock, and I'm just going to come in here and I'm just going to show you what you need to do with gel coat. It's very important that you don't just come and stick your fingers into it, because it could possibly be still, at that ultra tacky stage where you could put your finger through and actually end up down to the mold, make a mark on the outer product. So just give it a light touch in a place that's relatively inconspicuous, and I tend to like an area like on the seam side right here, where I know there's going to be a seam, and I can run my finger along that. Once I've done that, I can more confidently just give it a little touch further down into the product and all the way, and pay particular attention where the gravity has taken a lot of the gel coat down into a well like this. If that's wet, you can't start, because you're going to end up, by the time you put your resin in there, it's going to be forced through when you're using your consolidating rollers. So for me, I'm holding the camera here because I want you to see what I'm doing, but basically a little light rub, there should be nothing on your fingertips, nothing at all. You should have absolutely no residue of any gel coat on your fingertips. If you can do that, you're ready to go. I find here in my shop, I've just got a very small area where I store all of my cloth. So right here, I've got a roll of 200 gram carbon, a roll of 1200 quad, peel ply, 600 double bias, 300 CSM, 600 gram woven roving, and a 1280 gram combi mat, or Nitex type product, so which is a combination of rovings and chop matting. So having that sort of, and I've got carbon Kevlar and Enegra and everything up the back there. So just having everything in one place is really important for me. It means I can just cut a piece of cloth and go on. The other thing I have also is this cutting table here. Now, a lot of shops will have a very long table, like a 6 or 7 meter or 20 foot long table, particularly if they're making long products like boats or longer kayaks. They'll be able to extend the cloth right out and just trim it once. I tend to find, by having a shorter table like this, I tend to be a little bit more economical with my my cloth. I try to think how it's going to fit the product, rather than just have one big piece off there and then have a lot of wastage. I tend to try to think how I'm going to get it sideways rather than lengthways. That way I tend to end up using a lot less material. I also have a number of boxes underneath here where I can put 300 CSM, 450, cloths and rovings into the other box. So I'm storing stuff for later use. Now, I don't tend to get to it all the time because it's easy to pull off the roll, but if ever I'm desperate, I've got a small job, it's great to have that excess down in a box down here. But my cutting table also is only about 1 meter long, but I also have it 1 meter off the ground, so I know that when it's touching the floor, I've got 1 meter. So that's how I work with it. I make a small mark, roll it out, make another mark. That means I've got 2 meters already out, and then I can trim it. The other thing I have also is this little aluminium track, or aluminum track, which I've got routed into the deck of my cutting table, and that allows me to put my scissors into the track and actually cut along here. Now, I had an electric glass cutting device, which was fabulous, but I used it one day when it was wet and I basically gummed it all up and eventually it just died. That was 15 years ago. Still like the old shears. The only thing with these is you'll find is I have to take these in and get them sharpened about once every 6 or 7 months. I've got a guy in town that's really good at sharpening them. I've tried sharpening them and wrote off a couple of pairs because I'm not very good like that, but something you can practice on is with an oil stone. It's getting these nice and sharp. So having everything in place makes a massive difference. So I simply have to reach up. And the other thing too, when you're pulling cloth off a roll, because it's quite heavy, you know, you might have a 50 kilo roll there, try to pull it evenly because you'll distend it and take it out of shape, particularly with unidirectionals where you've just got a 0 and a 90 degree axis. When you pull it, it'll actually pull it out of shape and you end up with this cloth that's going like that. And that actually does weaken the structure if you're trying to get a perfectly strong, even structure over your product. So I'll grab it like this and pull it evenly down onto my table. And as I mentioned earlier, if I pull it all the way, I know that just before it touches the floor there, that's actually 1 meter. Now for cutting the cloth for the kayak that I'm making, I actually need to have a number of different sizes. Firstly, I need 2 500mm wide pieces for the midsection, and I need a 1.2 or a 1200mm long piece for the bow. And I'll show you basically that's 1 meter there. I can then add another 20 centimeters onto there, make a little nick, and then what I'll do is I'll push that down into my track here, and I can cut that without the shears catching the weave and distending the weave. So now I've got that piece cut. And typically you would still roll this stuff, but because I'm going to use it straight away, I'm just going to loosely fold it. It's a very good way, and I'll show you as I'm laminating the boat how I use this without too much wastage. So I just fold it like so, and I get it over here on my rack ready to go. And that process will go on for probably, to make a kayak, around about half an hour of cutting. And then just before I start, I cut up some strips of peel ply. Now, I used to be able to buy this in a roll of peel ply tape, which was edged, and I just cannot for the life of me find it anywhere in the world now. So if anyone knows where I can buy rolls of tape 100mm wide, please let me know, because it'll save me a hell of a lot of cutting. So I've got around about 15 strips there that is going to go around the perimeter of the deck, which is basically where the deck and the hull are going to intersect. And of course, wherever there's carbon overlapping, I'm going to run peel ply across it so that it lays down nice and flat to avoid any sharps inside the boat, and also down the center line of the deck where the foam pillar that's going to be glued in place is going to stick to the deck, so that I don't have to sand and prep that area either. So I have those ready to go, and now I'm pretty much ready to start laminating. I'm going to get my my tools ready, my roller, a fin roller, a pair of scissors, and I've got dry scissors here that live here. They don't ever cross to the other side of my shop. That's a couple of the rules I have here. We all get our little rules in our factories, but this one here, the scissors never make their way from the cutting table to the wet area. And there's a good reason for that, because once you get resin and stuff on your scissors and you're trying to cut dry cloth, it's going to stick, it's going to tear, it's going to distend your cloth. And over there where I've got all my tools, my brushes and everything, I keep them totally separate so that nothing, never the twain shall meet, I say. So I always start up at the bow and then work my way back. So you'll notice that I'm using a resin in an ice cream container. I generally start with around about 300 mils of resin, catalysed at 1.5%. Now, it was a particularly warm period over the time that I was making this kayak, you know, ranging from 22 degrees Celsius up to around 30 to 35, depending on the time of day. But catalysing at 1.5% gave me plenty of working time. You'll notice that I wet out the actual substrate, or the gel coat first in the mold, and then lay the chop strand matting in place, and gradually let that resin dissolve the binding agent. That chop strand matting is actually held together with a binder that is dissolved by styrene. So that styrene allows the formation of the cloth to suit the shape of the kayak without any sort of teasing or prodding. And you'll notice also that I use a brush to to sort of help it settle in. And you'll notice the concaves and the complex curves in this particular mould do sort of take a lot of extra work with the roller and with the brush to make sure that I can get that correct shape. Very importantly, that you'll notice also that I've used the large piece of cloth first, and then I've cut that around the edge, around about 1 inch, to prevent bridging, and then that section, or the offcut, then forms the rear section of the boat without, virtually with no wastage in the material. And I use that process with all of the cloths that I use, including the 265 gram roving and the carbon as well. So economically, you can use the cloth without actually wasting too much, and it's important that you use that process throughout all of your composites building. Now, layer 2 is a 265 gram per square metre woven roving. Now, this is actually a biaxial product, so it's at 90 degrees and at 0 degrees the axis of the cloth. It provides a very, very strong substrate to be laid, or an intermediate layer in between chop strand and, in the purpose of this boat, carbon, Kevlar or carbon. What it also gives is a very, very good impact resistance and a very, very stiff and rigid product as well, combined with the carbon. It is very, very easy to work with. You simply lay it in place as long as you lay it straight. Once again, I'm trimming the excess off the bow here and then transferring that to the stern of the boat. Again, not using any other type of cloth here. I'm basically using everything that I have there, and that's part of my measuring process. I've worked that out over the years I've been making this boat. Now, once again, with 265 woven roving, it doesn't conform as easily as, say, chop strand matting or even carbon for that matter to a shape like this. So it's very important that you put it on gently, and I use a dry brush to initially get the shape, and then I'll use the roller to consolidate it in. You may find you have to trim areas of it to stop it from lifting in certain areas, particularly around the combing here where I'm working here with the brush. Without putting this on correctly, you can easily stretch it and pull it out of shape, and that will ultimately undermine the strength of the fabric by pulling those that 90 and that 0 degree axis out of alignment. Very important that you do ensure that you've got the correct shape, and certainly put it on light and use that dry brush to get it into shape before then consolidating down with your roller, your fin roller and your wet out roller. Now, we're cutting around the combing here because it doesn't conform very well. You do need to cut the excess off and then pleat this region as well. Now, in a shop like this, we occasionally use straight carbon. You can see here I've got a roll here. Now, that is a very expensive investment for a small shop like mine, particularly when it's not being used regularly. So I always have a roll of this stuff. I mean, we all get warm and fuzzy when we think about carbon. It's so expensive. But the other thing too is that you don't want to be buying too much material up front. A lot of guys will buy it just because they get it cheap, and then 10 years later they've still got pieces of carbon laying around that are worth thousands of dollars. So a roll like that, a 100-meter roll like that, will be around about $4,000 to $5,000 in Australia. So really, you've got to have a use for it, and I tend to recommend, as people buy with me or order my products, that we can use carbon in certain places where we wouldn't otherwise. Now, obviously for economy. Now, typically when I'm selling boats or selling kayaks, your average guy is not going to buy a carbon boat because of the price of it. I use carbon Kevlar, which tends to be around about the same, a little bit more expensive, but has a couple of other benefits that straight carbon doesn't have. It has a lot more impact protection and a lot more I guess, ability to be able to be knocked around, whereas carbon can be quite a fragile medium to use in a lot of products, particularly in kayaks and things where they're being smashed against rocks and smashed in dumping waves, etc. But where you get the advantage here is in the rigidity. So you tend to like to use this stuff pretty sparingly. You don't want to just throw it at at every product that comes through the door here, because, you know, it's expensive stuff and you don't want to use it. So the laminate that we use here, because we're laminating a layer of chop matting and a layer of roving in there, we're getting that impact protection that you would otherwise get with carbon Kevlar, but you're also getting that beautiful rigidity that this product offers. Now, it's so important when you're cutting carbon, it's pretty easy to cut. It's actually more difficult with carbon Kevlar because the Kevlar tends to be very stringy and very fibrous, whereas the carbon itself, although it's very easy to cut, it's important that you don't catch the end of this in your weave and distend it, because no one likes to look down at a beautiful carbon product and see a big piece of, you know, the weave all off to one side or bending and curving. We want it nice and straight, and the laminate should reflect quality workmanship, not just a slap up job. But you can see here once again my track in my table pays off every time I cut cloth. If you can do nothing other than, if you're doing a lot of fiberglassing work, make a table like this with the track in it, you're on a winner. Even handling it, you can see here where I cut it last time, must have been in a hurry when I cut this. I like to get rid of this sort of stuff because that's going to end up marring my job. And you can, if you really want to get a dead straight line, you can actually pull one weave out of a piece of carbon and end up with a perfect line, and then you can cut through it, and that actually invariably stops it fraying. So if I was really meticulous, I could take this weave here and pull that out. If you want a dead straight line, you can actually pull a one weave out of a piece of carbon and it'll give you a perfect line to cut along. But for me, my track works just the same way. So there's my carbon. Look at that absolutely beautiful stuff. I love working with it, but sometimes I just can't get people to commit to that extra money to put carbon into a product. And you're certainly going to get benefit, there's no doubt. You're going to cut out a lot of weight and you're going to add a lot of rigidity, and often the money isn't seen as money well spent, you know, on a leisure item such as what I make here. But certainly for a quality piece, can't go past it. Easy to work with, easy to laminate in, but also gives you all those sort of additional benefits to a product that you wouldn't otherwise get with straight glass or a Negra or carbon Kevlar. Alright, that fella was 2 hours, 13 minutes and 47 seconds. With two people I can knock one out in about 58 minutes. So that's a nice effort, because that's a beautiful looking deck, and I hope you enjoyed that one, guys, because that was a big one. And it'll be very easy to walk away right now. So guess what, I'm going to hang around so I can green trim it. Probably around about half an hour to 40 minutes I'll be looking to green trim the edges of this, and then I'm going to leave it for a day before I even think about trying to demold it. So while I've been waiting for this to be trimmable, demolding easier and make my job easier, a lot easier tomorrow anyway, I've been cleaning up over here. You'll notice I've wiped down my table here. I always have this black plastic on here. I've given it a good wipe with some acetone. Doesn't seem to affect the plastic too much. All my brushes, rollers, everything's been tidied up and back in their place, ready for the next job. I've gone through probably about, I guess about 2 litres of acetone on this entire job, so there's quite a lot of acetone used, and that is one of the beefs that all of us composite guys will have, is the cost of acetone. I buy it in bulk, so it's not too bad, but if you're buying it from a general box store or a hardware store like Walmart or Bunnings here in Australia, you'd be paying about $10 a litre for the stuff. I buy typically a 200 litre drum for around about $400, so around about $2 a litre. So you can really save some money if you're doing sort of quantity like I am. But I'm going to be trimming this off now with a Stanley blade or a box cutter, and I'm just waiting for it to just be right at the right level of cure before I trim it, and then it's home for the day. Let it go off overnight, let that sort of really get into the shape of the mould, let it cure, and you know, that is going to be one beautiful boat when I pop it out tomorrow. So at the end of a massive day of green trim, that was a bit hard. Look at it, It is 36 in here, so really not ideal conditions for glassing and laminating. But I've got an aircon, and had I been a wuss, I would have turned it on. But the key is you learn to play with the catalyst, you learn to sort of play with the resin content. You do a litre to start with, you're down to cupfuls at the end, because you know as you get more meticulous and more brushwork and more sort of difficult sort of areas to laminate, you need less resin, because the last thing you want is a container full over here with half a litre of resin going off at 100 miles an hour. Have a cupful, just have a cupful. Honestly, you can work with it. It doesn't matter, it's not going to go off. You're generally going to utilise all of that resin without it going off on you. And that's proof that one guy can laminate up a kayak, and that kayak there probably has about as much work as a sea kayak hull in it. There's a lot of technical areas in there that need a lot of teasing and prying and pleating and cutting and trimming. And as I've shown you, there's some areas there you just do need to spend a little bit more time, and I've learnt over the years that the slower I go the better. 2.25 hours, mate, that's pretty good for a deck that's potentially worth about, you know, probably 600 US, maybe around $1,000 Australian. Really worth taking your time, put the labour, put the effort in, and put the thinking in, and it all comes back to that prep at the beginning. Okay, so I put the deck that I made out in the sun this morning just to give it a little bit more curing in the sun. It's pretty hot out there. Come back in, reckon it's pretty much ready to go. And once again, a couple of rules. Gloves, very important. I use this blunted off paint scraper that I use for absolutely everything, and some tongue depressors, some of those wooden tongue depressors. That's all I need to remove this, and then some pieces of cardboard just to get under it. So that's pretty simple. You don't want to be using any force, and I say this every time I demold something. I see guys forcing and prying and bending the mold and dropping things, and you know, if it takes that much effort to get it off, it doesn't want to come off. You better have to let it dry, let it cure, let it shrink a little bit, and often when it's curing, it is going to shrink about probably 0.5%. That's often enough to make it release on its own. Alright, simple demolding tools. Pieces of cardboard, preferably stiffer cardboard. Don't use blocks of wood and wedges. I mean, you can use softwoods, but they have to be thin. You don't want anything thick that's going to damage your end product or your mold. So what I like to do is that I will come along and find a little spot around about here somewhere, and I'll just slide really carefully. Don't force it. If you force it, you're going to damage what's underneath. Also, a good thing to do is every now and then check the cardboard hasn't got staples or anything in it either, because I've actually demolded a boat once with a bloody piece of cardboard and it had a staple in it underneath, and guess what? 3 hours of polishing at the end of that after I polished out the scratch. So it was actually my boat. And now I'm releasing the bow and the stern. I can start to now add some other shims. All I'm trying to do is get a little bit of distance between the mold and the product. And invariably, it often helps. You don't want to go any thicker than about a piece of cardboard folded up, because what can happen is if it's still a bit green, it can and will bend our product. We've got to be very, very careful at this stage. You hear a lot of cracking? It's not a very nice sound that you'll hear as it goes. At this stage, as we relieve it of its mould, and that is now relieved. It took bugger all effort to do that. That's out. Now I'm just going to lift it out of the mould and show you what we've produced here in a 2-hour sitting and about an hour of gel coating. and it's pretty light. Check that out. I always love to demold a brand new product, and it's perfect. It looks pretty good. I'm going to go over with a fine-tooth comb. Now you can see there's no brown in this. It's all black and yellow because I've concentrated heavily on making sure that I stippled that pattern. Now you can do that with any colour you like, but you're going to have to be very, very careful with your method and your technique to make sure that you don't end up with too many areas. You can concentrate on a couple of areas like this here rather than a blend, and that's what I was aiming for, so I don't end up with a brown textured boat. The fella that's ordered this boat is going to be stoked. Thanks for joining me this week, guys. It's a big day in the shop here today. I'm laying up flat sheet. I'm making a number of them. You know, this week will be around about 10 or so of these large foam core sandwich sheets. They're a laminated product, laminates on both sides. They're forming the internal walls and internal road structure of my catamaran. These are the sorts of things I love to do. I like to do them in big batches so I get organised. I do all the pre-prep and then I just basically hit it over a week. I'll do a number of sheets and then I can cut all manner of shapes and petitions and road petitions and bulkheads and everything that I need out of these sheets. And the great thing is that I've got a stockpile of stuff that I can get on with and really have good progress. So don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to like the video, and please share it out to your friends. There's a lot of stuff in this series that's going to be really interesting to anyone that's into composites. Thanks for joining me on the Composite Shop, guys, and I'll catch you later. See ya.